Hello and welcome to Whispers from the Soul. And another week, we are here again today with a new NDE. And today we're going to go all the way to Colorado in the United States. And we're going to talk to someone who has had an NDE, obviously. And he's going to tell us what his life was like before, during, and after the NDE. And then we'll go into a little bit into detail about spirituality and about all these things that is connected to having an NDE and what it feels like and how it changes someone. And someone who talks to them all the time, like me. Not just having it, because I haven't had one, but I talk to people who have had them all day long. And my thoughts and my feelings towards everything has changed. Not just towards spirituality, but towards everything, the way you live your life and everything. So these sort of things change people. So let's go to Colorado and we're going to speak to Mr. John J. Davis. Hello, John.
Hey, Peter, how are you doing today?
Nice to have you on the program. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for your time, because I imagine you've talked about this a few times now since it
Well,
happened.
well, thank you so much for inviting me. I always love to share my story. Every time I talk about it, it always brings back those memories. So I'm always thrilled to go on podcasts and share my story because it gave me so much hope, and it gives other people hope too.
It's good, yes. It is something that we was talking about just before we started recording, about the hope of there being something after life. Life, that's why I call this program Life After Life. The channel is called Whispers from the Soul, but the actual program, because I have various programs, this one's called Life After Life, because it's not life after death, it's life after life.
Yes. Yep.
That's
Absolutely. It's a great title.
it's that word death that everyone goes "Ooh," when they think about it and when they think about
Yep.
it. So
Yep.
let's go into it. Right before this happened, because this happened to you quite young. So what was your
Yeah.
life like before this happened?
Well, this happened when I was 21, and I had never even heard anything about near-death experiences at the time. And I was Catholic. My dad was very Catholic, and we used to go to church 2 or 3 times during the week, and then also on Sundays. So my whole upbringing was about Catholicism, very religion oriented, very a lot of dogma, a lot of doctrine, not a whole lot of spirituality, not a whole lot of helping people understand that God is love and not to be fearful, not to be afraid of God. So my background before I had my experience, it was a lot of it was fear based. I didn't know what to think of God. I didn't know what heaven was supposed to be like. I just really pretty much was indoctrinated with Catholicism.
Yeah.
And after my experience, I went from being very religious based to extraordinarily spiritual, realizing that God doesn't care what religion somebody follows as long as it gets them closer to God. It doesn't matter which religion you follow, because
Mm.
no religion on earth has all the truth to it. And that's one of the things that I learned from my NDE was that God is more than just one religion. There isn't just one right religion.
Right. Yeah, because so that's what we're saying. Yeah. I mean, all religions have more or less the same base, and they're based on being good to thy neighbor and trying to help other people and love.
Right.
But then it's followed up by you have to do this, otherwise you'll be punished.
Exactly.
That's
Yep.
what screwed it all up. That's what screwed everyone. But still, they've still got billions of followers and millions and millions of followers. So, but
Yeah.
I think we're going to a stage now with people like you talking about NDEs and all different types of spirituality as well, different types of mediums and different types of people like this. I think that's beginning to shift the way of seeing things, the perception of people on their on around who are watching these type of programs. Don't you think?
Yeah. I think it's changing too. There's a lot more media coverage now about the near death experience. A lot of people are talking about it, and so many people have had an experience now that it's becoming more mainstream. And I think a lot of that is taking away the fear that people have,
Yeah.
knowing that there is really no death.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And also, there's the also experiments going on now with doctors that are very famous. There's a association called the EANS, which is
Oh
a
yes, yes, I've heard of that.
that's
Yep.
they're investigating the phenomena of the NDEs,
Yeah.
and
I've
it's really
actually we have a branch of IANS here in Denver, and I went and saw them a couple years ago, and they get together once a month and talk about NDE stories, and they're happening all over the country now, probably all over the world too.
they are all over the world. I have a friend here who we're in a WhatsApp group of different types of spirituality. A lot of them are NDEs here in Spain, all Spanish, and the actual I would call him the organizer or the guy who's in charge of putting these reunions together, these meetings together, is a friend of mine here in Spain. But
Oh,
he's
wonderful.
it's really big in Sweden and Finland and these areas. They have really like they meet once a month as well. Here in Spain, they meet once a year and they do online meetings every so
Oh,
often.
wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really good. It's all over the world, all over the world. I just found out about it not long ago, a few months ago, when I met this guy, and it's happening as a big phenomenon all over the world. So it's more and more, as we say, it's getting more and more news and
That's
more
great.
open.
I'm so glad to hear that it's happening all over the world too.
It is, it is. Believe me, more and more. Right. So when you were 21, what happened? What
Yeah,
happened?
I'll give you the I'll tell you how this whole thing started. My dad was in sales his whole career.
Right.
And one year he won a sales contest.
Oh,
And what he got these two mopeds, or what we would call scooters
yeah.
nowadays.
Mopeds.
And we, we
Yeah.
used to we used to ride these all over the neighborhood all the time. But one day I was out riding and I had an accident and I crashed into a tree.
Oh,
And the way that I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand.
wow.
And I had to go into surgery to have them reattached. Well, I was only 21 and I had never really been in a hospital and I had never had any kind of surgery.
Right.
So I had no idea what to expect. So my mom actually drove me down to the clinic, and when I was in the operating room and they gave me the anesthesia, something happened and I had a horrible allergic reaction and it stopped my heart, and I actually died for 7 minutes.
My
Well,
goodness.
during that 7-minute period, I had this experience that absolutely changed my life, and it was called the near death experience. And what was so weird is that it felt like I was there for an hour or two. It was this long process, but here on earth it only took 7 minutes, and I can't explain that. And
No.
it was the strangest thing, but that experience changed my entire life. And I'll tell you, I'll go through the whole story so your audience can hear my everything that I saw and everything that I remember. And what's so interesting is that, you know how a lot of people say that they had gifts after they had an NDE?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have anything like that. I wasn't I wasn't psychic. I couldn't hear God. I didn't have any of the abilities. But something that happened to me is that I remember every single detail about my experience like it happened yesterday. And that's really strange for me because normally I can't remember anything. I have a really bad memory, but I remember every single detail, everything I saw, everything someone told me. And I think that was something that God gave me so that I could share my story with people. And that's what I've been doing my entire life, is just sharing my story.
I think the most important that usually with the NDEs I've interviewed or that I've spoken to, they say, although they can remember every detail of what they saw, what they heard, everything that was said to them, what they clearly remember more than anything is the actual emotion they feel. They're
Yeah,
being surrounded by this like love or this unconditional love and this feeling of everything's just brilliant.
that's something that I can absolutely vouch for, because when I was over there, you can feel God. You
Mm,
can feel you can feel this being
mm.
who loves you so much. You can't even comprehend how much God loves us. And when you're over there, you can feel it. But here on Earth, we don't feel that. I don't know why that is, but it's so completely different. That's like when you're on the other side. You can feel how much he loves you. And in Earth feels like when you come here, you're in a battle
Yeah.
and you're in a foxhole without a radio, and you feel like you're cut off. You don't feel like that when you die. You feel that love of God, and it's the most extraordinary feeling I've ever felt. In fact, when I got back and I realized what had happened, I thought about suicide a lot because I could not understand how was I going to make it here. I was only 21.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How was I going to make it through all the years of my life knowing how beautiful the other side is? And so I just had to realize that they gave me a message to share, and that's what I'm here to do.
That's brilliant. That is really, really good. And we're all here to hear your message.
Wonderful. Well, I'll start from the beginning then.
Okay.
They gave me the anesthesia, and my eyes closed, and I officially died.
Right.
Well, it felt like a couple of seconds later, I opened up my eyes, and I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen.
One
It
second.
was
Did you feel yourself pop out of your body?
no, I
Oh,
didn't feel
right.
that.
Okay. No, because
Yeah.
some people do feel it. Some
Yep.
men, that's why I'm asking. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. And I was standing in this building. It was a long corridor building. It was so long, I couldn't see the end of it. It could have been miles long. It was beautiful white marble, like polished white marble. On the right hand side, all the way down, were these tall marble columns, maybe 20 or 30 feet high, about 6 feet apart. In the middle of this corridor were these tables, and they were made of marble, just white marble tables, and it looked like they correlated to the columns on the right hand side, going all the way down. And there were two people sitting at every one of these tables.
Hmm.
And right about now, this is when in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." Well, I didn't know what a spirit guide was. I had never heard the term, but apparently all of us have spirit guides.
Mm.
They're with us during our entire lifetime,
Yeah.
and they help us plan our lives. The spirit guides actually help us plan what experiences we need to help us learn what we want to have or what we want to learn from. Well, I want to back up a second and tell your audience kind of what the traditional experience has been for someone with an NDE, and my mind was a little bit different. Like what you mentioned earlier, people feel themselves pop out of their body. A lot of times when they're having surgery or there's some kind of an accident, they'll see themselves floating above their bodies, looking down. And then they become aware of a tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's a white light.
Mm.
As they start going down the tunnel, they're met by someone, either a loved one, a grandparent, a friend, who tells them it's not your time. You have to go back. So we've never known what happens at the end of that light.
Mm.
Well, my story starts on the other end of the white light. And what
Uh-huh.
happens when a person goes into that light, they end up in what is called the orientation center.
Right.
That's where my whole story starts.
Right.
Well, on the left-hand side, on the all the way down as far as you could see, were these doorways, and they looked like tunnels,
Right.
and they looked like they had been cut out of solid marble. And
Wow.
when you looked inside of them, it was like looking into space. It
Hmm.
was completely black. Well, what I realized my guide was, as this whole process was going on, my guide Alan was telling me what I was seeing. He talked to me the entire time in my left ear, and he told me that these doorways are tunnels. They connect Earth with the other side, or heaven, or the afterlife. And he told me that the people that are sitting at every one of these tables, each table had two people sitting there.
Right.
He told me that they were orientation counselors.
Mm.
And the reason that they're there is when we finish a lifetime, and we cross, many times it's really confusing
Yeah, I
because
can imagine.
we don't remember where we're from. Most people that I've ever met have maybe a little bit of memory that we're not from here, but most of us don't remember where we're from. So when you finish a lifetime and you come back, many people are confused. Well, that's what the orientation counselors do. They basically tell people that you just finished your life and you died, and now you're back here on the other side. And that's their whole job. Well, my guide said, look at the next tunnel. So I looked up, and there was a gentleman coming through. He was an elderly man, probably in his 80s or 90s, and he had his right hand over his chest like this, like he had chest pain. And my guide said he just died from a heart attack. So he died, his soul left his body, and he started traveling down the tunnel. And when he walked into the light, he ended up in this orientation center. So right about then, the woman that was sitting at the table closest to him, closest to that tunnel, she walked up, she took his hands in hers, and she walked him back to the table, and they sat down. And she held his hands the whole time. And I could see her talking to him, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. I could just see that her lips were moving. And my guide said to watch him. So I start watching him, and I can see the back of his head. And all of a sudden, he began to change. He changed from a man who was in his 80s or 90s into a man in his early 30s. And my guide said to me, all of us are in our early 30s. And I didn't think to ask why. And there were so many questions I wish I would have asked.
Yeah.
But I didn't know that I had died.
Well, I don't know on the other side, but here on Earth, in a physical form, the early 30s is your best age. Because you know enough to know what's going on. Because when you're in your 20s, you're dumb because you don't know what's going on. You're fooling around saying what the hell's going on. And then when you're in your 30s, you have enough consciousness to know what's going on, and you're physically still really fit. So it's the best age for me anyway. Physically, it was the best age.
That's true. I think that is true.
I don't understand why on the other side we need to be like that if like everything's perfect. So we don't really need our physical strength or anything.
That's a good way to put it. That's true. Yeah. So well, anyway, he changed from a man to be in his early 30s. And then once this process happened, it was like he was beginning to remember where he's from. Beginning to remember that, oh, that's right. I came from the other side. I came from home. I went to Earth to have a lifetime and to experience. And that's what the orientation counselors do, just help take away that confusion until people remember where they're from. Well, then he stood up and he walked off to the right. And he walked down 3 marble steps, and he walked into what I would call the gardens. I don't know if that's what they call it. That's just what it looked like. It was the most beautiful garden I had ever seen. The most beautiful green grass and flowers and plants and trees. And there were all these people there. And my guide said, everybody has a reunion. And what that means is everybody that you remember in your lifetime, friends, family members, and all the people you've already known on the other side, are all there to greet you when you come back. And the reason is, this is what my guide told me, that coming into a lifetime on this planet is a really big deal because life here can be extraordinarily hard.
Yes.
It can be just very, very challenging.
It can.
And there are many souls who don't come here because it is too hard. So when we come into a lifetime, it's a really big deal. And that's why when we finish, all these people are there waiting to greet him, and they were clapping, they were applauding, they were hugging this man. And it was just the neatest thing to see that we all have this reunion. Well, then what happened after this is my guide, Alan, he started to show me these specific places on the other side. And it was only a small area. The other side, or heaven, or the afterlife, It's almost like a planet. It's absolutely huge. And what he did is he took me to all these places and he showed me the outside of the buildings first.
Right.
And then he took me to the inside. And in fact, the building that I was in, this orientation building, your audience can go to Google and they can type in the Temple of Artemis. There's a temple in the country Turkey,
Yeah.
and it's spelled Artemis, the Temple of Artemis.
Yeah.
And it looks so much like the building that I saw the orientation center in. So that's something they can do to look and see what it looks like.
It's like an actual like rectangular building with all columns, isn't it? There's all columns
Yes.
all the way around it, white columns.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. It looked very Greek.
Yeah.
So then he took me in all these different places. The next place he took me to was this beautiful rectangular building, just like you described, and it was huge. I can't even describe how large these buildings were. There's absolutely enormous. And then he takes me to the inside, and one of the rooms he took me to was a round room, just a perfectly round room. And on the top of the ceiling were these movie screens, almost like what it would look like when you go see a movie in a movie.
Right.
They had movie screens all around in a big circle. There must have been 15 or 20 of these movie screens. And my guide said, this is where you have a life review. And all of a sudden, every one of the screens lit up. This one was playing, this one, the ones behind me. And what they were playing is they were playing episodes of my life.
Experiences you had.
Exactly. In each one was of a different age.
Right.
One screen had me as a little toddler playing in a crib. Another screen had me on my first day of kindergarten. Another screen showed me when I entered junior high school. And all of these screens were playing at the same time.
Like certain things you don't even remember.
Exactly. And one of the things my guide said was that the life review is the greatest teaching tool. Because all of us have a reason for coming here.
Of course.
Nobody's life is by accident.
No.
We all plan these different experiences, what we want to learn, and when you have a life review, you actually have that review to see how you did.
For yourself.
Exactly.
It's for yourself. It's for no one else. No, there's no judgment. There's no one saying you did this wrong, you did this right. It's for you to say, I did this okay. I didn't do that so good. I could do it better next time. It's yourself, isn't it? It's your own. This is what I want to make really, really, really clear in these videos, because this is not the first time I've heard this. Of course, there's quite a few people who've had this experience, and all of them said the same. The most important thing in this review was there's no judgment.
Exactly. God doesn't judge you. Nobody gets sent to hell. There's no judgment. The only people that review your life are you and your guide. Anybody can come in there and review a lifetime, but nobody judges you. It's strictly for the idea of learning. And what is so interesting is that you can feel the things you did for people. If you help somebody, you can feel that, how much they appreciated your help. And at the same time, you also feel if you hurt somebody, if you intentionally hurt another person, you will feel what that person felt. And that's the greatest learning tool, because when we come into a lifetime, the whole idea really is there's two primary reasons. The first one is we come into this because we want to learn. We want to experience. And the second thing is to help other people. And one thing I like to share is that on the other side, or heaven, there is no negativity. There's no war. There's no disease. There's no
Judgment.
Corruption. Yeah, there's nothing like that. And you can still learn on the other side.
Right.
But you don't have the same experiential type of learning that you have here on Earth.
Right.
When people come here, the best way that we learn is when we go through something hard, something challenging, something tough. And on the other side, there's nothing to work through.
No.
And that's one of the primary reasons why we come to a planet like Earth,
What I
is
come
to
to the conclusion is on that, because I've heard this a few times, the conclusion I came to of hearing it a few times is that on the other side, there's no contrast. There's no
yeah,
contrast for you to know the difference. So here, because the contrast is so vast, there's black and
exactly.
there's white and there's this and there's that and there's religion and there's no religion and there's this religion and that religion, there's this politician and that politician and there's this ethnicity and this ethnicity. So it's all, there's lots of contrasts, and of
Yeah,
course, it all comes down to judgment.
exactly. And what you just mentioned was something that I noticed too. When I was over there, I didn't get the feeling that there were Catholics or there were Jews or there
Yeah,
were Muslims or
yeah,
Hindus. It wasn't like people identified themselves by religion. They identified themselves by spirituality.
that's right.
And the absolute love that people feel over there is extraordinary.
Of course, because there's no differences between anyone. There's no men or women, and there's no black or white, and there's no different religions. There's no politicians, so it's just no contrast.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there's nothing
And
to
that's
fight over.
exactly. Yep. And if you look at your life and you look back at episodes of your life in your past,
Mm,
we always seem to learn the most when we go through something hard,
yeah,
something painful.
yeah.
And that's what makes us better.
Mm,
And it's that learning and that knowledge that we take with us back to the other side.
mm. Yeah,
Well, that was, and
I
that's,
agree. I agree.
yeah. So that was the life review. Then he took me out. We went to another building. Again, this one was also a huge, long, rectangular building with columns, white columns out front. And he took me into one of the rooms. And this room looked like what we would call a normal movie theater,
Mm,
a long room with a screen up at the front. And this is a part, Peter, that I had a hard time with initially because I was raised Catholic. And he told me that I'm going to show you different lifetimes. And he was telling me that he was going to show me past lifetimes.
right.
All of a sudden, the screen lights up like a movie started, and it's me. And it didn't look like me now, but I knew looking at this person, it was me in a
Yeah,
past lifetime.
yeah.
And I was a monk. I had a shaved head, I had a red gown or a red robe on, and I was in a monastery. And there were all these little kids. And my job in that lifetime was to teach children about living and becoming a monk in a monastery. And that lifetime took place somewhere in Southeast Asia.
Right.
And then the screen went blank, and then it started again in another lifetime of me. This time I was a shoe peddler. I had a wheelbarrow, and I had all these shoes stacked in this wheelbarrow. And my job in that village was I repaired people's shoes for them. I repaired them in my little shop, and then I took them back to the people in the community.
That's great.
And that, yeah, and that lifetime took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. And then that disappeared, and then another screen lit up, and it was another lifetime.
Mm,
And it was me. I was standing in a wooden boat, a new kind of boat, and I had these fishing nets, and I was tossing them into the water. And my job in that lifetime was to catch fish for the village.
and where was that? Did you say?
That one took place somewhere in the Middle East,
Right.
and it was some kind of a lake. And what was so fascinating was that I realized that we live forever. We don't ever die. And the whole idea of past lifetimes never occurred to me. But if we have been around for billions of years, of course you want to have lifetimes because that's how you experience and that's how you learn. And what's interesting too is that nobody forces us to come into a lifetime.
No.
It's totally up to the soul.
Yeah.
They can have as many lifetimes as they want
Mhm.
or as few lifetimes as they want. And that was just I thought to myself, oh my gosh, of course that's true. Of course we have as many lifetimes. We don't have just one life. You can if you want to, but most souls want to come in and to continue growing. And I think when God created all of us, he gave us all kind of like part of our spiritual DNA is to want to learn
Right.
and to want to grow. And I think that's something that all of us have in common. We all want to continue learning because knowledge never ends.
No, I
And
agree.
that was a wonderful experience in that past life. It was wonderful to see that.
I heard not very long ago someone talking about this. I think it was an NDE as well. It wasn't someone I'd spoken to. I just saw it on the internet, and he said, I don't know if you had this sensation, is that all past lives, all lives, all your lives you're living are actually happening at the same time.
Yeah, I've heard that before too, and I don't know. My guide didn't mention that to me, so I don't know.
Because life here is linear, so we have
Yeah,
linear time. So if you lived in the 18th century and you live now, for our mind, it's impossible. But
yeah,
for the other side, it's not impossible. So it is possible for those lives to be lived at the same time, but nobody knows whether is like that or not. But somebody was told
yeah,
on the other side that they all happen at the same time.
yeah. I've heard that before too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know if it's true, but it's nice to think
it's
about it though. But it's because
yeah,
there's so many things like the time difference, like you said before, the time over there is just there isn't any time. So
yeah,
it seemed like hours, when here it was just a few minutes. So
exactly.
these
Yep,
things we're not able to comprehend them. So we just say, okay, it was like that. So it's just like that.
yeah,
We don't know
yep,
why or how it works, but we know it's like that. Just have to accept
exactly.
it.
Yep, exactly. But the next place he took me to was this another gigantic building, but this one was round,
Mm.
beautiful round building, and it looked like there's a building in Rome
Hmm.
that has a big dome on top. That's
Yes.
I can't remember what it's called, but it has a huge dome.
Oh,
That's what this building looked like. And it had white marble columns all around the circle of this circumference of this building. And my guide told me that this is where we go when we plan a lifetime. And I don't know why we go there, but that there's just something about this building that we all go there when we plan a life.
mm.
So we go on the inside, and he walks me up to a table, a beautiful white marble table. And there's one single scroll sitting on this table. And it looked like the kind of scroll that you would see like Egyptian papyrus paper.
Yeah,
It looked kind of like that, and it had a blue ribbon around it.
right.
And my guide explained to me that all of us plan our lifetime ahead of time. None of our lives are accidents. We plan things like who our parents are going to be, what country are we going to live in, what language are we going to learn, are we going to go to college, what kind of career do we want to pursue, are we going to have kids? And we write down all this information on these scrolls. So I picked up this scroll, and it had a blue ribbon around it.
Hmm.
I took the ribbon off, and I laid the scroll out on this table, and I could see immediately that it looked like calligraphy.
Mm.
Remember when you were a kid and you
Mm.
had those pens, you dip those pens in the ink and you started to write? That's what it looked like. All the way down this scroll was this black writing. And my guide was explaining to me that, we just plan our lives. None of us come here by accident. There's always a reason as to why we come into a lifetime. Well, when I went to try to read what was on the scroll, it folded up again. Just like that, it folded up, and I wasn't able to read it. And I think the reason was because if I had read some of the lessons that I wanted to learn, I may have done something to avoid that lesson in my lifetime. So my guide just wanted me to be able to explain to people that your lifetime really is planned ahead of time. So I looked over to my right, and there was this huge, gigantic wall, and it was filled full of scrolls.
Mm.
Every single person that was having a lifetime on Earth at that time had their scrolls on this wall. And so my guide just wanted me to know that everybody has a scroll. And when you finish your lifetime, you come back, you can look at your scroll and see how you did. Well, right about then, he took me into what I would call a library, this huge room, and there were all these books on bookshelves, but they all looked identical. They looked like, have you ever seen Encyclopedia Britannicas?
Yeah.
They're kind of thick,
Yeah.
and they were all kind of like a maroon color, kind of like a purplish color,
Right.
and they all had gold lettering
Mm.
on the binding, but the lettering didn't go horizontal. The lettering went down the binding. So he takes me up to one of these books, and I look at it, and it says Nina, 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 and all the books have different names on them. And my guide said, "This is your soulmate. Your soulmate's name is Nina." Well, I had never heard the term soulmate. I didn't even know what it was. But he explained to me that all of us at creation, God created all of us with a perfect mate. So on the other side, you have your perfect mate with you for eternity. And the one thing people have asked me a lot is, does the soulmate come into lifetimes with you? And that I don't know. I know that when you have relationships here on earth, those are one of the number one things that you learn from. You learn about yourself, you learn about other people, you learn about life through relationships. So I don't know if your soulmate comes with you in your lifetimes. I know that they can. I just don't know if they do very often.
Mm.
And he wanted me to be able to tell people that soulmates really are real. Because a lot of people on earth feel like, what's wrong with me? I've never met the love of my life. I've never had a wonderful relationship, and you may not have chosen that.
Yeah.
You may have chosen this lifetime for other things, other
Yeah.
reasons.
That's right.
But when you pass and you finish your lifetime, you have that perfect person with you.
Mm.
Right about then, I looked over to my left, and there was this gorgeous, huge window. And this is where I saw people for the first time. There was a outside this building that I was in, there was a walkway, and it was really busy. It was full of people walking back and forth. It was almost like what it looks like if you go to a big city at
Mm.
lunchtime.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like all these people walking back and forth. And on the other side of this pathway was the most beautiful lake I have ever seen. It was round, and all around the outside of this lake, they had these weeping willow trees. Have you ever seen the weeping willows?
Oh, beautiful. I love them. It's
Yeah,
my favorite tree.
they're gorgeous. Well, in the lake, all the weeping willow trees had their leaves floating on the surface of the lake. It was absolutely gorgeous.
Beautiful.
And my guide said, all of nature is on the other side. So if you like to hike in the mountains, if you like to go to the ocean, if you like to go to a lake, if you like to go to gardens, all of those things are on the other side. And he also told me that everything you like to do on earth, you can do on the other side.
Mm.
And the other side is it's so remarkable because you can go to music festivals, you
Mm-hmm.
can visit with family and friends, you can play sports, you can take classes, you can go to lectures, you can anything you love to do, you can do over there too.
No, that's
And I
good.
love that. Yeah, I absolutely love that
That's
part.
good. So I'll be playing football after when I die then. So
Yeah, yeah.
I go to the other side out because I'm in love with football. My son's going to be happy to hear that too. He's
Absolutely.
a
Yep.
fanatic to play football, so he's playing football. There's a couple of things that you said that resonates with a lot of things that people have told me. One, the scrolls, which are what we call the Akashic records,
Yes. Yeah.
which you can tap into from this side if you know how. There's certain ways of doing it through meditation, and if not, there are experts who know how to do it with your. But you have to give them your permission. But that
Oh yeah.
I wouldn't recommend to do it because to let someone go into your Akashic records is not advisable unless you know them very very well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
The Akashic records, and then the other thing is I want to ask you is that when you said about the window, when you looked through the window and you saw these people going backwards and forth, was there a difference between were they like physical people here on Earth, or like people from the other side? Was there a difference
They,
between the two? Like
yes,
your
they,
guide, for example, Alan, who was he with you?
yeah, he was with me the
Did he
entire
did he
time.
look like you?
You know what was really interesting is I never actually looked over to see what he
Ah,
looked like. I never
right.
actually saw him, but
Okay.
all the people that I saw in that walkway that were going back and forth,
Yeah.
they look like we do.
Right.
Everybody seems to have their own personality, they have
Yeah.
their own look, and they can appear however they want to appear on the other side.
Right.
Some people were taller, some were shorter,
Right.
some were brunette, some were blonde. It was like looking at somebody in a city, or look
Right.
at all these different people in a city.
Hmm.
And wherever I was, wherever he took me to, it was a really busy area on the other side. It was almost like, you know how when you've been on a college campus
Mm.
and you have your history building, you've got
Mm.
your English building, here's your science building. It kind of felt like that's where I was, that I was in this general area where all these different buildings were that we come to learn from. That's kind of what it felt like.
Ah, faculties, different faculties. And then in the
Yeah,
middle, there's all the kids playing, sitting down, talking, drinking.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The next place he took me to, I think, was my favorite in my whole NDE. A lot of the buildings he took me to looked like they were made in Greece, Greco-Roman architecture, the white columns, but this building was different. This one it looked like a stadium,
Right.
like a modern stadium where you would go play football or
Brilliant.
soccer.
Right.
And then he takes me to the inside. In the inside of this building, there were thousands and thousands of seats. It was huge, and all the lights were on, and it was really bright inside this building. Well, I noticed that when I looked up at the ceiling, it was round. It was a round dome. And what it was a planetarium. And
Ah,
remember when you're a kid, you take field trips to planetariums
love
and
it.
yeah, I loved them. I loved them too. Well, this building was a planetarium, and there was a gentleman behind me. And I don't know why, but I never turned around to look at him. I just heard him talking to me. And he said, "Let's begin." And so I just sat down, and all the lights went off. And he said to me, "When you look at the stars,
Hmm.
this is what you see." And what he was talking about was everybody at our level of development. This happened back in 1987 when I had my NDE. He said, "When you look at the stars, this is what you see." And all of a sudden, all of our planets in our solar system started showing up. Our sun, then Earth, and Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, all of our planets. And then they disappeared. And then he said, "When we look at the stars, this is what we see." Meaning all the people on the other side, this is what they know when they look at the stars.
Right.
And all of a sudden, planet after planet after planet started showing up. First, there were dozens, then hundreds, then thousands and millions of planets started showing up.
Right.
And he said to me, "There is far more life in the universe than you can possibly know."
That's obvious.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
just by mathematically speaking, I mean, there has to be. There has to
yes.
be. Of the
And
trillions and trillions of galaxies that are out there, not stars, galaxies, where there's trillions of or billions of stars in each galaxy. I mean,
exactly.
it's mathematically, we can't be the only ones here.
Have you seen some of those pictures that they have from the James Webb Telescope now?
Oh yeah, I'm hooked.
It is absolutely
I'm hooked.
extraordinary.
And I listened to Dr. Brian Cox, who
I,
talks.
I love him. I
Yeah,
love
he's
that guy.
brilliant. He's brilliant. And I love the way he explains it. It explains all about the exoplanets and this different
Yeah,
stars and how they die and how I just love it. And so when you said that about the planets, I thought they have all the planets where there's life, and they're
yeah.
looking at them through. Oh, I'm so glad you said that. It makes me really, really happy. But
Oh,
this
me too.
one is one of the most difficult ones.
Yes. Absolutely, it is. It absolutely is. And one thing I like to tell people, just because I've always loved astronomy, it's always been something that
Me too.
I grew up watching Star Trek with
Ah,
Captain
yeah, me
Kirk.
too.
And something that I like to tell people, just so they can kind of get an understanding of how large we're talking about. And if you look at the Milky Way galaxy, if we had a spaceship on Earth that could travel at the fastest speed that we know, which is 186,000 miles a second, which is the speed of light, it would take 99,000 years for that ship to get from one end of our galaxy to the other. And that's just the Milky Way galaxy.
One.
And somebody asked Brian Cox on one of these documentaries I watched, they asked him, now that we have all the data from the Hubble telescope and we're getting more and more data from the James Webb, how many galaxies do you think there are? And he said they estimate that what they know, that they think that there are probably over 2 trillion galaxies.
In the
And
visible
he,
universe. That's the universe
yeah,
that we can reach to see.
exactly.
But then
Yep,
further on from there, there's more.
exactly. He said, you can't, we said human beings can't even comprehend
No,
how large that is.
no.
And he said that somebody asked him, well, how many planets do you think there are in the Milky Way? He said they think there are over 100 billion planets
Yeah,
just in our galaxy alone.
yeah. Between
Just
100 and
that
200,
much.
I think he said. Yeah, he said there was about between 100 and 200 billion in one.
Yeah,
And this is a medium-sized galaxy.
yeah.
It's
It's
not a
not
big
even a
one or
large
a
one.
small one. It's a medium size. So there's others out
Yeah.
there. And there's that. What was that picture that was taken in 1997? I think it was, or 1998.
Are you thinking of the deep field
The
study?
deep field photo,
Yeah.
where
Yep.
about
Isn't
it
that
was a piece of
remarkable?
the sky that was like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, like the size of your thumbnail at 20.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And he said there was over 12,500 galaxies in
Galaxies.
that small photograph. I mean,
Exactly.
imagine how many stars that is between
I
200
can't I yeah, I
billion
can't even
stars in each
comprehend.
one of them. I mean, there has to be life out there.
Yeah. There
It
has
just
to
gives
be.
you an idea too of how insignificant this planet is
Yeah.
amongst
Yep.
all what is out there. We're so tiny, so small, so it's nothing.
Do you remember Carl Sagan?
Yeah,
He was the first one who said there are more planets in the universe
yeah,
than there are grains of sand on planet
yeah.
Earth.
That's right.
It's just
That's right.
absolutely unbelievable. It's just
It is.
mind blowing.
It is. It's unbelievable. I mean, I used to love talking to because when I was a teacher, when I used to teach, I used to teach science, and when we did space, we used to love it, and we used to go to the planetarium as well. And
Yeah.
when I used to talk about these figures, I showed them the deep field, and talked about Brian Cox, and I used to talk to them about because in the curriculum it only talks about our solar system, and it doesn't go out
Oh,
any
right.
further. It doesn't go out any
Yeah.
further than that. And in year 5, students they want to know more, and
Sure.
so I downloaded this app because I used to have iPads. I used to download this app by it's actually created by Brian Cox called.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's got an app called Wonders of the Universe,
Oh,
and in this app you can go out to the visible universe. So you can amplify. You can start off with Earth, and then make it smaller and smaller and smaller. Then you go to the solar system. Then you go to the galaxy. It shows you where we are in the galaxy, and then it goes to the nearest
wow.
galaxies, the local group of galaxies, the Virgo cluster, and then it goes to super Virgo cluster or the super cluster, and then it goes to where we are in the universe, and it shows how the universe is. And the kids used to love it. They used to love it, and they were
Oh,
realizing
yeah.
then, well, how small we are.
Yeah.
And
Man,
of
that sounds
course, that gives you a different perspective of everything.
yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Turns his
Definitely.
perspective around totally.
Yeah.
It's
That's
amazing.
remarkable. It's
It
just so
is.
remarkable.
It is. It is absolutely beautiful. And I suggest that the people who are watching us and are into spirituality, because this has a lot to do with spirituality, the
Yeah.
greatness of where we are and how special we are as not as humans but as beings in this vast space that there is out there.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And before my guide took me out of this planetarium, he told me that he wanted to show this to me because he wanted people to know that Earth is not the only inhabited planet.
Yes.
And then he said that there are multiple unlimited worlds that you can have lifetimes on. That Earth is not the only one.
Mm,
It's just one of multiple worlds you could have a lifetime on.
mm.
And Earth is only one of those choices. So there are multiple planets that we can have lifetimes on.
Did you get the
I
name
thought
of any of them?
no, I didn't get the name of any of them. And when they were when he was showing me all the planets,
Right,
it was like I was looking at them from orbit.
right.
I was too high to
Yeah,
see any kind of civilizations or
yeah.
signs of life, but
Okay,
every planet that he was showing me was had life on it.
yeah.
They all had life on them.
But did they look similar to Earth, like from space? You know, the photos we see from.
Yeah, there were some. It was really interesting. Some were had much more water surface than ours.
Mm,
Others were brown. They just had deserts.
mm,
Some were full of jungles.
hmm.
They were all different. They all had their different and they also have their own evolutionary scheme too.
Of course, yeah. Because
Yes,
if you're mostly desert, then we'd probably adapt. Our bodies would adapt to it, wouldn't it?
yes, exactly. Yep, yep.
That's right. And if they were water, I suppose the same.
Yeah,
Have webbed fingers or something like
yeah,
that.
the adaptations are based on what your environment is like.
Of course, yeah. Of course,
Yeah.
evolution through humanity.
Yep,
So that's
exactly.
really interesting. I've never heard that before. So that's a new one for me.
Good, good. Yeah, and I absolutely this was my favorite part of my NDE. Well, the next one was also kind of a favorite for me because I've always loved history.
Oh, me
I
too.
love I love learning about the past. And the next place he took me to was this huge building, and it didn't have columns on the side. It only had columns in the front,
Right,
like all these columns in the front and all these steps leading up to the front of it.
right,
So he takes me to the inside, and inside is this huge library. It was so large I couldn't see the end of it, and there were looked like wooden bookshelves just full of everything. And my guide said everything you ever wanted to learn is inside this library. And there were
like the Library of Alexandria, right?
yeah,
Alexandria,
Yeah, Alexandria.
which burned down.
Yeah, yep. Kind of like that.
Mm,
And there were people everywhere. There were people sitting at tables, people were visiting, people were looking for books. And then he took me over to the left-hand side of this library.
hmm.
And on the left-hand side were all these rooms. And they looked like what we would call today as study rooms.
Mm,
And he took me to one of the rooms, and there was a woman sitting there. Her back was to me. She had jet black hair all the way down to her waist, and she was wearing kind of like a purple kind of gown or a robe of some kind. And she was sitting there, and she was watching what we would call today a flat screen TV mounted on the wall.
It
And it
sounds
was it
kind
was
of out of place, doesn't it? Like a Greek building with this woman dressed as Greek, and we're watching a
yeah,
flat screen television. Like
yeah, it was
something
just like
doesn't
that.
fit there.
And it was interesting because back in 1987, we didn't have flat screen TVs yet.
No,
We just had these big, bulky televisions that
that's right.
there's no way you couldn't mount it on a wall.
No,
So she was watching the screen, and my guide said, "Get a little closer to look what she's watching." So I got closer, and I was watching what I thought was a movie. I thought she had a movie playing,
right?
and it was Native American Indians in a battle with the United States cavalry. And I thought, oh, she's just watching some kind of a movie. And my guide said, she's not watching a movie, she's watching actual history. And I said, how is it possible she could be watching history? Because we didn't even have video cameras back then. This was a battle that she was watching 200 years ago.
It actually
That
happened.
took,
Yeah.
yeah, and I said, how is that possible? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And I still, to this day, I don't understand how that's possible. but it's a God thing. Somehow, everything that happens in our lifetimes is recorded.
Yeah.
So if you're on the other side and you wanted to learn about what it was like to be on the Titanic, or if
Right.
you wanted to learn about what it was like at the Battle of Britain, for example, in World War II, you can go to this library, you can go to these areas on the other side where these rooms, and you can watch living history. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic because
Wow.
one of the things I want to do is I want to go back and I want to see what it was like on D-Day
Right.
when the Allies landed in France.
Right.
And I knew you would like that part because you like history too.
Yeah, I do. I love history. Yeah, I would have wanted to see so many things, so
Yeah.
many things. Wow, loads. I would have gone back to the epoch of Genghis Khan. I
Oh
would
yeah.
have
Yeah.
seen, I don't know, the Second World War, for example, things that were going on in the Second World War.
Yeah.
That,
Alexander the Great, Napoleon.
Alexander the Great, all these
Yeah.
times, the Trojan War, wow, loads of different eras. Jesus Christ,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Romans, that era, things that
Exactly.
happened there. Wow, I would have seen so many things, so many.
Yeah. And we can see all of it.
Yeah, yeah,
Here's something else. This is another part you'll like too. The next place he took me to, it was what we would call a castle, just like a castle you would see in England or in France
yeah.
or in Scotland. And it was absolutely perfect. Like it was just built, these beautiful stones making
Wow.
this big, huge castle. And my guide explained to me that if you didn't have a lifetime in a certain period of Earth's history, you could go to the other side and you could see what people lived in at this like medieval Europe.
Wow.
And this, he took me to a place that you could go to if you wanted to learn about medieval history. And he showed me what people lived in. They lived in these castles. So he tells me to go inside. We walk in, and there was this beautiful red carpet. The first thing I noticed was this red carpet all the way through this whole castle. And the idea was to make you feel like what people felt when they entered castles. They felt like they were royalty. Well, on each side of the walls of this castle, all the way down were these life-size paintings.
Wow.
And the paintings were of people that had lived during that time period as royalty.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to learn about King George or Queen Anne, you could go to this castle, you could look at their picture on the wall to see what they looked like, and it also had the kind of clothes that they wore. Well, in front of every one of these pictures, there was a podium.
Wow.
And on the podium was a book. And the book was about that person's life.
Wow.
So if you wanted to learn about Queen Elizabeth,
Yeah.
you could go to the castle, you could look at her picture, and you could also read about her life in this book.
Wow.
Well, right about then, I looked over to my right. You remember how castles, they have those kind of round stairwells you walk
Yeah.
down?
Yeah.
There was a woman walking down the stairwell.
Mm-hmm.
And she had a kind of a peach kind of gown on, and she had strawberry blonde hair down to her shoulders. And she walked up to me and she said, "Can I help you find anything?" And you know what I said, Peter? I said the stupidest thing I could have ever imagined.
Well, you might think it's stupid now, but then you more thought it was a good idea. So.
Yeah, I said to her, "No thanks, I'm just looking." I kind of like
all the things you could have said.
Exactly. And I didn't know what I could have asked her anything. I could have said, "Who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. What's going on?" And my guide said that on the other side, what she likes to do is she's a historian of medieval Europe. So she was like what we would call a professor.
Right.
So if you wanted to learn about that particular Earth's history, you could go talk to her and ask her any kind of question. And I thought that was just fantastic because on the other side, everybody has things they like to do.
Right.
Whether you like to play music or you like to write or you like to play sports or whatever you like to do, that's what everyone does on the other side. They pursue the things that they love to do.
Wow.
And I just loved, I wish I would have asked her so many questions, but I know I'll be able to when I get back.
Well, of course you will. You'll be able to
Yeah,
go there and talk about all the things. You've had a lot of time to think about it. So when you go out,
exactly.
you have a
Yep.
list of things you want to do, want to see, and want to learn.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's brilliant.
Well, the very last thing, this is probably one of the most profound parts of my whole NDE. He took me to a meadow, and this meadow was the most beautiful natural setting I've ever seen. I've never seen anything on earth that was as beautiful as this meadow was. Beautiful, beautiful grass and wildflowers. It was a perfect day. It wasn't too hot. There was no wind. It was absolutely a perfect place. And then my guide left. He left me standing there.
Right.
Well, I turned around, and as soon as I turned around, I noticed there was a gentleman
Hmm.
standing in front of me, and I could see his hands. He was wearing a white robe with a golden sash around the waist, and he had gold colored sandals that laced up his calves, and there was so much light that was coming out of his face, kind of like this.
Hmm.
I couldn't see his features,
Hmm.
but I knew immediately that this was the entity or the being that we knew as Jesus
Hmm.
during his lifetime. And he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." And the second he said that, it was like, boom, I was right back in my body inside that clinic having the surgery.
That was the message you had to give.
That was the message. Absolutely. Yep. That's exactly. And that's how my whole story ended. That was my whole NDE.
Wow. That was a lot of detail.
It was, wasn't it? It was crazy.
It's a
And so
lot of detail.
ever since then, I've just always tried to share my story. And it's because it was the way he said it. He didn't say, "You know what, John, when you have time, when it's convenient for you, when you're not busy, would you mind sharing this?" It wasn't like that. He said, "You must tell them there is no death." And that's when I realized after I got back and I started thinking about, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm just going to commit suicide because I want to go back there.
That's right.
Then I realized that he gave me this message that I'm supposed to tell people. And that's kind of what made me realize, all right, John, this is what you're here to do. Live the best life you can and share this message with anybody who will listen
Mm,
because it gives people hope.
of
Because
course.
their loved ones, their children, their parents who pass, they're not really gone. They're
Yeah.
just in a different place. And as soon as you finish your life, we're all going to be reunited again. And
Of,
in fact, I like to tell people that the happiest day that you will ever experience is your last day here, because that's the day you get to go home.
mm,
There's so much fear about, like we talked about earlier, there's so much fear here that people have about death. They don't realize that it's going to be the best day of their entire lifetime.
mm.
And that's really been my message.
That's brilliant. That is amazing. There's so many questions that I personally had that you've answered with one was the planets, about life in other planets.
Yeah.
Because I was sure, but I never heard anyone talk about that. I was sure that we could choose between this planet or other planets.
Oh,
And
yeah, absolutely.
and that this life living here on this planet is one of the most difficult.
It is.
I also know.
Absolutely.
And so I'm glad you said that because that's confirmed it for me that that's the way it is. And that's
Good.
the way it should be. And then, of course, the revision, the life revision also, I knew there was no judgment. That's another thing that's can put people at rest and say, "Ooh, thank goodness for that." But that doesn't
Exactly.
mean you go out and start killing people. It means you got to
Yeah.
try and do things right because you're going to judge yourself. So it's going to
Yes. And nothing is hidden. God sees everything.
be, yeah,
Nobody gets away with anything.
no, no, it's nothing at all. So although you think you're kidding other people, you're not.
It's true. Yep. Very true.
God sees everything. He sees everything, and whatever it is, consciousness, God, whatever you want to call it, but it's there and it's part of us. So you
Yep.
just have to understand that. So from
Yes.
the moment when you came back, did you start talking about it straight away, or did you let time
No,
pass?
the the only person that I told was my mom,
Mm,
because I didn't know what had happened.
mm.
And there was no words, there was no terminology about an NDE yet. There
No,
wasn't
no,
even
no, no. It's in the last 10
nobody was.
years that people have started really talking about it. There was a community that would, a small community of science community that was talking about it, but not the general public.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Well, my mom was very spiritual, and she gave me a book, and I think it was the only book at the time. Do you remember Raymond Moody?
Raymond Moody, yeah.
Yeah, in
He was the first
1975.
one.
Yeah, he wrote the book in 1975 called Life After Life.
That's right.
And my mom gave me that book that day, and I read the whole thing in one day. And that's when I realized,
Hence the name of the program, Life After Life, comes from
yeah,
Raymond Moody.
yeah, exact. That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, that was the first book I read, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's when I realized that I saw heaven, or the other side, or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. It's real.
Of course.
There's a reason for all of us being here. And it's so wonderful when you get back. There's all the things that you go through here on earth, all the heartbreak, all the troubles. There's a reason for it. And you'll know that when you get back to the other side. And it was just the most extraordinary experience I've ever had. And I have never grown tired of sharing my story, because I love the fact that it always gives me hope when I think about it. And I think about my story all the time.
Of course you
I
do.
can't I can't wait to get back, but I know that I'm here to live as long as I possibly can to share this with anybody who wants to hear it. That's what I'm here for.
And this is the perfect time to talk about it because now people are starting to open up about it. Because up until now, 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago, people wouldn't listen. They would say, oh, that was just a
Yeah.
memory. He was unconscious. It was just his mind. But
Yep.
until 10 years, from 10 years till now, people who have had these experiences 40 years ago, who hadn't even told their husband or their wife that it happened,
Yeah.
are talking about it, and they're coming out and they're saying, this is what happened. This is right. So I am right. I wasn't going mad.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
So it's great. It's great. And I'm really, really happy for all of you that do this. And I love it too, because I'm just so into it. This, and you've talked about various themes today that I just love. You talk
Yeah.
about history, you talk about astronomy, you talk about, NDE, spirituality, all these things. I'm into all of them. So we
Me
get
too.
on the same level. We're on the same level.
Yes. Exactly. Yep.
Well, thanks very much. It's been absolutely brilliant. You have to write that book. Don't
I
leave it.
will.
You have to do it and give it to the world. Give it to the world because the world needs it. Because although there are quite a few that have written about their experiences, everyone's different. Every
Yeah.
experience is different. It's
Yeah.
different perception and a different way of explaining it, and there's different ways of reading it. So some people find it easier to read maybe yours, and somebody might find it easier to read others. So the more there are, the better.
I agree with that 100%. Yep. I
That's
agree.
right. That comes from a primary teacher who has 25 children and has to deal with each one of them differently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
So thanks very much for coming and for your
Well,
time.
Peter, this
And
was wonderful. Thank you so much for inviting me. I had such a good time talking to you.
me too. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thanks very much. See you
Thanks for
again
having me.
soon. I hope I see you again soon.
I would like that too.
Good.
Thank
Okay, Whispers. See you next week. Next week we'll be back again with another NDE, and I hope you'll come and see us and see what they have to say. This one was different. This one was a little bit different than the others, so maybe next week it'll be different again. So see you next week. So, Anna.
いたかいあまやなだまい